Hey everybody, Neal Bryant SOC here to talk about just some basic maintenance and upkeep you can do on your G70X at home to keep it in top condition. If you haven't seen my other video on tuning the arm, I recommend checking that out first. Before we get into this, I just have to say, Tiffin had nothing to do with this. This is all stuff that I've mostly just figured out on my own. If you're not mechanically inclined or if you're uncomfortable doing any of this stuff, send it into the factory or your local dealer for service. If you put a wrench on your arm and you damage your arm based on something you saw in this video, I'm not responsible for that, right? There's one person responsible for maintaining your gear, that's you. So let's get into it. Did you notice clicking when I was booming up and down in my tuning video? Can you hear that? If you're experiencing that, have a look at your lift knob and see if it's popping up and then popping down as you boom. It'll go click, 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 click. If that's happening, I would start with this flat wrench that should have shipped with your arm. You'll notice beneath the knob, there's a little nut there, and you can grab it and just give it a little righty-tighty. If that is all the way tight and you're still getting the clicking, your bolt that actually controls your lift adjustment might be wearing out. So this is pretty fascinating the way this whole thing works, because it looks to me like what's happening as you boom down, this assembly leans forward so that the spring pulls less and less and less the more and more you boom down. And then as you boom up, it leans back and pulls more and more and more. And that's how it basically creates that isoelastic effect. When you turn this lift knob, you're turning that green bolt that you see, and it's riding up and down and guiding that spring terminal up that shaft and down that shaft. The tolerances here have to be really fine, so it's coated in that green paint. You can see mine is kind of worn out. So as soon as this quarantine business is over, I will be sending my arm to the factory for maintenance. Have a look down in there and look at your green bolt. You'll be able to see it at the back of your arm, especially if you take the spring out, which we'll go over soon. But if you are noticing that the green has worn away, sort of in the middle of your bolt there, get it into the factory and have them change it out. If you've seen my whip pan tutorial, you might have heard a popping sound occasionally. That was caused by this socket block to kickback link connection. So if you're experiencing that, I would say pop this off and rub a little white lithium grease here and here. Pop it back on and wipe away the excess, and that should clear it right up. Another place to put white lithium grease occasionally is if you see these ride threads, if they look bone dry, a tiny dab of white lithium grease, thread it all the way closed and then open it back up. That'll redistribute the grease. Will keep your threads, your bolt operating smoothly. Are you hearing pinging, like a really springy ping sound? That can be caused by your spring is titanium, and this threaded piece that threads into the spring and anchors it in place, I believe that's steel, but what's happening is the tolerances of that piece threading into that spring have to be so fine. And if any burrs develop, because this thing is under so much tension, it basically creates a perfect echoing system where these tiny imperceptible slips of that piece in there create this huge ping that like echoes up through there. If you have that problem, I would send it into the factory. My arm developed this issue after about 3 years of ownership. They basically have to pull that piece out. I think they have to file it down really finely and then reassemble it. But that's best if you're experiencing that to send it to the factory. These little bumpers can pop out from time to time. If they do, if you manage to catch one, just put a tiny little bit of a very mild glue, very mild adhesive, and you should be able to press it right in there. Very little bit of glue will do it. And truth be told, you don't even need the bumpers necessarily on the outboard facing side of the arm. But if it's on the inboard side, like I'm a regular side operator, so I would operate with the arm like this, if these two bumpers were missing, this piece can collide together. And if your elbow's there, like I'll reverse it so you can see it. If my human elbow were resting in there, these bones will actually collide and it will pinch the hell out of you. It really sucks. So I would say if some bumpers fall out of your outboard side, I mean, just hold on to them and save them in case you lose a bumper on the inboard side. Now this thing, I would call these your travel bumpers. There are 4 of them in all. If you load the arm really violently, like if it tops out or bottoms out, this really soft rubber here can actually crack. If that happens, it's not the hugest deal. It just means when you reach the ends of your arm travel, as you get to the extremes, rather than coming to a soft stop, the arm will kind of clunk to a stop. I was able to have them just ship me new bumpers. To replace them, you'll take the spring out, which I'll show you in a minute. Then this becomes all loosey-goosey, and you're able to just remove this Allen bolt and replace the bumpers. Your arm post holder. If your arm post is slipping, like if you're tightening this lever all the way down and the arm post is still slipping throughout your day, you can tighten it up pretty easily. It's a 5/64 Allen wrench on one side, and then have a buddy grab this bolt or this nut on the other side and just tighten it up. It might even just be 1/8 of a turn because it's a cam lever. It's really, really powerful. So just cinching it up a little bit, you can keep that nice and tight, nice and secure. The last thing I want to talk about before I take the spring out are these trunnion bolts. There are 16 of them in all. Every now and again I see in the Facebook group some poor guy, his bolt has backed out and ended his day or caused a big problem for him. If that happens to you, most times you can relax the spring, take it out, that'll take all the tension off of the bone, and you can thread the bolt back in. But honestly, you should never even get to that point. All it takes is a 7/32 Allen wrench, pop it in there, and just check your bolts, once a month, a couple of times a year. Check everything, make sure it's working. Check these bolts, make sure that your arm post holder is held securely in place. You need this thing to take care of you and to make you money. And really just a few minutes every couple of months can prevent something catastrophic like that from happening to you. Keep the arm as clean as you can. Buy arm covers, buy backups of your arm covers. If you're going outside and you live in a dusty place like Southern California, just throw the covers on. The more you keep this thing clean, the less you'll have to do what I'm describing. So one reason you might take the spring out is to clean the arm. Another reason is to perform one of those minor repairs I was explaining earlier. If I were going to clean this thing, the first thing I might do before I pull the spring out is just get in there with a camel hair brush, because once I collapse the spring, it's going to be all sealed up and I won't be able to get in there. So I would do that as a first step. It's very important, if you have a look down in here at these nuts way down in the back. Yeah. You see there are no threads showing at the base of that one. And let's go over here to the other one. There are a couple of threads showing right there. For some reason, my light won't turn on my phone. But that, the reason for that is, at the factory, these two springs, differences in their tolerances had to be accounted for each other when they were calibrating the arm. So the fact that a couple of threads are showing here, but no threads over here, that's a balancing effect that they did to get the two sections to work together. The next thing I want you to look at is if you look down in here, you can see the spring, there's not a lot of clearance. It's almost colliding with that piece right there. That's a rotational thing. You want to look at how the spring is oriented rotation-wise inside the arm and put it back the way you found it. I take pictures of everything before I take anything apart. So 7/16 wrench, what we're gonna do is we're going to access that bolt right there. And you can see that bolt, if you look at your arm, it's actually running down through that spring. And that long travel of that bolt is what's going to allow us to gently release the spring. So I'm gonna put this socket wrench on this guy. And I'm gonna loosen it. A few turns, because it's a lot of threads. The best thing you can do for yourself once you get the bolt loose is pop this off, put it on a drill, get yourself a rag down in here to protect the bones of the arm. And let's loosen her up. Okay, I'm just gonna use my fingers to thread the rest of the bolt out of there. It's almost out. Okay, now you see what I'm talking about, how long this bolt is. So check this out. There's a bearing between these washers here that allows this thing to spin at those insane velocities for that long when you're engaging and disengaging the spring. So keep this like this. Don't lose any of those parts. I'm going to set that aside. Now the arm just opens up and there's no tension on the bones. You know, if you were going to replace this bumper like I talked about, or thread a trunnion bolt back in or anything like that, you could pretty much stop at this step. Now, if I were going to get back here and clean this stuff and wipe it down, I might want to pull the spring out. So again, have a look at how it's set in there, how it's rotated. Have a look at how many threads are showing. In my case, it's none. And you should be able to grab this thing and back it off. You might have to grab this nut and hold on to it. There we go. But just be careful, don't scratch your arm, and then you should be able to thread the spring right out of there. Okay, spring's out. One more thing that I look at. These two ends of it are different, slightly different. I've got these little pieces on this side. I don't know why. But I'm going to put this spring back in exactly the same way I pulled it out. So take pictures, remember. Now, if you needed to get in here and wipe down anything or clean anything, this would be the perfect time to do it. I don't recommend undoing these trunnion bolts and actually pulling the bones apart. There's a ton of little washers that can be in here they've got a very finely compensate for differences in tolerances in the bones. And if you mix up, the washers that are in each one of these, you can create a big problem for yourself. There should be no need to take it apart further than this. If you do, again, there's always factory service. So let's put the spring back in. I'm going to look at that. I'm going to put it back. I'm going to go ahead and set my nut for how many threads we're showing at the base. In this case, it was none. I'm going to start threading this back on. Really gently, making sure that I don't cross thread it. Okay, I've got the spring bottomed out there. I got kind of lucky on the rotation, so I'm just going to tighten it down. Check it and make sure that that's not going to collide right there. It actually looks really good. So the hard part's over. I can take my bolt. This is really important. When you put this back together, I'll try to rotate it so you can see. Can you see this piece down in there? Aha. That piece is not symmetrical. There's a taller side. It's taller on now the left side than the right side. You want to put it tall side up, tall side toward the top of the arm. So this is correct. This is incorrect. That's tall side down. We're going to go tall side up. Very important. So I'm going to get the bolt through that. I'm going to go ahead and close the arm bones. And I'm going to very carefully get those threads started. I don't want to cross thread anything. Go ahead and get them going. And as soon as we're going, and I've got a decent amount of threads in there, I can pop this drill back in here. You don't need a drill to do this, but man, there are a million threads, and it'll really save you a bunch of time. Okay, now that it's topped out, I'm going to put it back on the socket. Get a good grab on that bolt, and I'm going to tighten it. Nice and tight. Remember, this is holding all of your money, all of your livelihood. And that's it. That is how you take the spring out of a G70X and put it back in. One last thing, guys. Dale Vance taught me this tip. Don't just hang your arm on here and let the stand get wheeled around all over the stage and your arm bang into the stand. Throw your arm bag on here as well. You can put your arm in there as well as on the pin, and it'll hopefully keep your anodizing fresh for years to come. Happy flying.